Hello and welcome to the July 12th edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morisuti. We're hosts here at Locked On Leafs, and a couple of things we got to get into today. The qualifying offer deadline has come and gone. We'll tell you which Maple Leafs were and weren't extended qualifying offers, and a couple surprise non-tenders around the NHL, including a goaltender whom I believe the Maple Leafs should definitely inquire about. Then Nick Richard from Leafs Nation Network and Dobber Prospects going to join us to tell us a little bit more about the Maple Leafs draft class. So he'll dive into that. So all that and more on today's edition of Locked On Leafs.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, your one-stop shop for all things Leafs. I'm your host, Mike DiStefano from TSN 1050 Toronto Radio, also known as Al's brother on TSN's Overdrive and TSN 1050's Leafs Lunch. Joining me, it's my co-host, Dave Morisuti from Sportsnet, also writer for the NHLPA. Locked On Leafs is a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast, so be sure to subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts from. You can also now check us up on video format on YouTube. Just search up Locked On Leafs on YouTube and make sure you hit subscribe. All right, David, silly season continues. It's one of the busiest weeks of the year when it comes to general managers and deadlines and whatnot. We had the qualifying offer deadline pass on Monday, and the Leafs really had two players that they had to make some decisions on. It was widely reported Pierre Engvall and Ondrej Kase were the two players who they were deliberating about whether or not they were going to extend them or send them a qualifying offer, or whether or not they were going to try and, not tender them, which would make them unrestricted free agents. Well, we have the answer. Pierre Engvall did receive a qualifying offer of $1.25 million. He does have arbitration rights, but typically we see, teams and players try and hammer things out before it gets to arbitration. So they'll continue to speak. They'll continue to try and come up with a solution for everybody that works, a number that works. Ondrej Kase, on the other hand, was not given a qualifying offer, and he will once again be an unrestricted free agent. So from what I gather is they were worried that because he also had arbitration rights, and the way it works essentially is unless I think it's 4-point-something million, unless the arbitrator awards the player more than like 4.2 million, the team's kind of stuck and they have to take it. So they were worried that the arbitrator would come in roughly around a $3 million range for Ondrej Kase, that he was going to be able to present a case that earned him that much amount of money. And they didn't want to roll the dice and do that. So they decided to not tender him, and he becomes an unrestricted free agent.
Yeah, it's been a crazy day with the qualifying offers. But yeah, I think when you look at Ondrej Kase, I think this is a case of the Leafs. It's not that the Leafs don't want Ondrej Kase. They just don't want to get caught in a spot where, an arbitrator gives them a pretty decent, number in arbitration, and then the Leafs are stuck. So I think it only made sense given what happened this year. Obviously, not performance-based for Ondrej Kase, more because of the injuries than anything else. And you can't let this be a reason why, again, you're not able to do things in free agency, because you could have. The Leafs did obviously the smart thing of making sure that they're not stuck with a contract that just doesn't feasibly work for them.
And they could always circle back, right? Because it's not a buyout. Oh, I just got a text or a tweet. Jaron Dreger just tweeted. Sounds like Matt Murray to the Leafs is getting close.
Are we getting breaking news?
We're getting breaking news while recording the podcast. We're recording this at about roughly 6:30 on Monday. So probably for whoever's listening to this, it might be done. But that's something we're going to have to monitor over the next couple of minutes. We're going to have Nick Richard on too. It's going to break, and we're going to be like, okay, prospects, hold on a sec. Let's talk about Matt Murray. But for now, I guess we can continue to talk about because it's getting close. Hasn't been done yet, but it's getting close apparently by the time everyone's listening to it.
When an insider says it's close, folks, it means
it's done.
Yeah.
it means it's done. So
As someone who's worked on a desk where I have to break news, when they say it's close, you better have a story prepped and ready to go.
yeah, you got about an hour to figure things out, because that you're
Even
going to get
less in some cases.
news come out later. But anyways, so until that happens, we'll continue on with what we originally planned on discussing. But yeah, so like they can circle back to Ondrej Kase if they want to in free agency, because it's not a buyout situation where you're not allowed to buy him out, then go back and bring him back. You can just legitimately, no, we're not going to qualify you, but we still want to keep in touch, and maybe we bring you back if you don't get the offers that you want in free agency. And ours it still is the best offer at maybe $1.5 million or so. Then perhaps you can see him kind of come back to the Maple Leafs. We'll see. We'll see what happens with Ondrej Kase. So Engvall did get qualified. Kase did not. Funny enough, at the time of recording this, the Leafs are like the one team that didn't send out a press release or a tweet about all of their guys. But I did read that it sounds like they didn't qualify Christian Rubens either, which I thought to be interesting, because he was a guy who finally got a cup of coffee in the NHL this year when injuries arose. And, he was a young defenseman in his early 20s who I thought they had put in a lot of time in the minors to try and groom him to be part of, the tweener group that could go up and down the lineup. I was a little surprised not to see him get qualified.
Yeah, I mean, a guy that clearly the Leafs wanted to give a bit of opportunity to this year when they made a few of those call-ups. And it's tough because, you want to have the depth, but you also want to make sure that the depth is able to actually is serviceable. I thought maybe this is another case where the Leafs could potentially circle back, or they that one did surprise me a little bit when we kind of talked about that yesterday. But I guess the Leafs just felt like they could either bring him back at a lower number, or it just wasn't worth giving him the qualifying offer.
We should also mention that, of course, Rasmus Sandin was also extended a qualifying offer. I guess I just assumed that was going to happen, so I didn't talk about it. But Sandin was also given a qualifying offer, and they'll try and figure out something with Sandin. They'll at least retain his rights, which is what they want. But he doesn't have arbitration, so that's going to suck for him. 1 sec. Sorry, I got a phone call there. I know it was Ross. It was Ross from Locked On Sens. He's calling because we just did the Tuesday national show. He's like, Buds, we got breaking news. We got to do a crossover. I know that's why he's calling. But
we might have to. We might have to do one.
We might have to do one in the next couple of days. Absolutely. We will once that deal becomes official. But it also sounds like Chad Chris was left unqualified, as well as Joey Dushik. So Engvall and Sandin, the only Maple Leafs that were qualified today. Or yesterday, if you're listening to this on Tuesday, which is most likely when you will be listening to it. But a couple other interesting names that were also left unqualified through the rest of the NHL. None more notable than Ilya Samsonov, the goaltender for the Washington Capitals, former first-round pick of the Caps, a guy who they thought was going to be their future in goal. They look at it, and basically the same thing as Ondrej Kase. They say, arbitrator's going to award him between $3 and $3.5 million. We don't feel that's worth it for what he's provided us. Don't think that's going to be the case going forward the next couple of years. We're not interested. They left him unqualified after their GM had said a week ago that they were going to extend a QO offer. Doesn't come. Does he become the number one target, you think, for the Maple Leafs? Maybe not number one, but is he certainly a strong target for the Maple Leafs now as they head into free agency, Dave?
He really should be. I think so. Like, I don't think that you're going to lose your mind if you don't get an Ilya Samsonov, but considering what the goaltending market looks like and depending what happens here with the Matt Murray situation, I like the age. He's only 25.
Yeah.
I think the Capitals haven't really done a good job with their young goaltenders. Him and Vanacek really haven't been given a lot of support. I think there's a lot.
You trade away Vitek Vanacek at the draft, and then a couple days later, you don't tender Samsonov. You got zero goalies now.
They must feel very confident. I know that somebody was wondering
one of those two,
Campbell or Kemper, because even Nick Backstrom, his future is kind of questionable. So that's like about 9 9 and change that you can take off the cap there.
Yeah.
So they do have some cap space to work with. It's just, even if you, let's say, bring in a Jack Campbell or Darcy Kemper, they still need another goalie there.
Probably, but that they could talk about that on Locked On Capitals. For us, Ilya Samsonov now becomes a person of interest. That's for certainty, is it not?
Yeah, he had very good numbers in the KHL. The Washington numbers haven't been stellar, but I'm not sure how much you can chop that up to him personally, or just like
The
I
team.
watched the Capitals play.
A 912 save percentage in the playoffs this year through 5 games against what was the number one offense through the regular season in the Florida Panthers.
Yeah.
Not too shabby, right? His rookie season, he was a 913 goaltender with a 255 goals against. Like, this guy was a first round pick. Like, I mean, there's 6'3", 200 pounds. So he's got some size. He's got that Russian factor, which they know how to pump out goalies over there, apparently. I think this is definitely a very interesting name to monitor if you're Toronto. And it sounds as though we're going to see this trade kind of come through with Matt Murray shortly. A Matt Murray, Ilya Samsonov kind of tandem, to me, sounds okay. Like,
I'm
that's
okay with that.
being the case.
I would be very.
It should be not cheap, but it's not going to cost you as much money as, say, going and getting a Kemper or bringing Jack Campbell back. And you should be able to address other needs on your team that way.
Yeah, no, I think I just think that the idea of going with putting all your chips into one basket for the Leafs with the Jack Campbell or Darcy Kemper just doesn't seem like the right move. Based on, I mean, Kemper has at least played more like a starter than Jack Campbell. Jack Campbell, to me, I know a lot of people on our Discord channel, even on the podcast comments, have been okay. They feel okay giving him $5 million a year. Some okay to give him 5 years. I just don't see it for the Leafs. I think that would be a bit of a mistake there. So you go with something that's a little more short term, and you at least get two guys you feel like. I feel comfortable, at least if Murray isn't up to snuff, you at least have a Samsonov that can be a good 1B or 1A option, whatever you want to go with there.
Right. So we'll see what happens there. We're definitely going to be keeping an eye on it over the next little bit, as I'm sure we'll get some more clarity and information on that. But we're going to be joined by a special guest on the other side of this break here. It's going to be Nick Richard. He's going to join us. And a lot of you, if you're diehard fans or in the Twitter sphere, Leafs Twitter, you probably are pretty familiar with his work. Works for the Leafs Nation Network, pretty active and vocal on Twitter. Also works for Dobber Prospects. So he knows what's up when it comes to these prospects that the Maple Leafs just drafted. He spent the last couple of days diving into the video. So we're going to hear from him on the other side about the Maple Leafs draft class, and may even get some live breaking news reaction if we end up seeing this deal come through over the next 20 minutes or so. So on the other side, Nick Richard going to join us. But first, Dave, let's tell the good folks about our friends over at Built Bar.
Yep. From the people who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift to your taste buds. You probably tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar. Guess what? They're now bringing the Puffs treatment to the coconut brownie chunk. That's right. The coconut brownie chunk Built Bar flavor you love, and a deliciously chewy marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. Let's also remember, folks, Built Bars are low calorie, low sugar, high protein, and of course, delicious. They're only here for a limited time, so make sure you go to builtbar.com, built.com right now, because they are going to go fast and they taste amazing. All Built Bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. Eat something that tastes good and is good for you. The best part about Built Puffs is, of course, they taste amazing, but you can enjoy them guilt-free because they're actually good for you. They are the perfect treat, perfect when you have a craving you need to satisfy, or even if you have a sweet tooth, you got to get that taken care of. Delicious, coconut-rich, sweet brownie, creamy marshmallow. Stop fantasizing. Get to Built.com right now to order your coconut brownie chunk Built Puffs right now. And make sure you take advantage of our offer, which is to use the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. So that is promo code LOCKED15 to get 50% off at built.com.
Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morsuti. We're your hosts here at Locked On Leafs, and as promised, we got our special guest joining us for the back half of this show today. It's Nick Richard, prospects writer for Dobber Prospects and also Leafs Nation Network. Nick, really appreciate taking time to join us today, pal.
Oh, thanks for having me on, guys. I'm looking forward to chatting about the new draft class and everything else that's going on with the Leafs right now.
Yeah, we were recording the first half just before you got on and saw the tweet from Darren Dreger saying that the Matt Murray trade is close, which we all means, okay, so within the hour, that trade will definitely be finalized and broken. So if there is breaking news, we will definitely break that, which whoever's listening to this obviously will already know about it. But that's what happens when you're recording ahead of time.
That's the podcast world.
But that's exactly what it is. But let's get into some of the prospects that were drafted by the Maple Leafs, the newcomers to the organization, because you did a pretty good job outlining on Twitter, and you wrote a good piece, a good story about all these players. So I thought it'd be a really good job to bring you on and get you to talk about them and let our listeners give them kind of a little bit more knowledge about who these guys are, because a majority of people listening and watching this podcast, I'm sure, have never seen a single game of maybe any of these players, to be quite honest. So, I think it's extremely important to bring on specialists such as yourselves who does go through the tape and, has a pretty good idea of who these players are. So why don't we start at the tippy top, right? Start with the kid who they ended up falling 13 picks by getting rid of Mrazek's contract, and they took at 38th overall. Fraser Minten, the two-way centerman of the Kamloops Blazers. What'd you think of that pick?
I'll be honest, I was a bit surprised that that's where they went in that spot, just because it was a bit of a reach, relative to where Minten was ranked in a lot of public boards and stuff. But public rankings be damned, this is obviously a player that the Leafs really liked. With their propensity for trading down and the fact that they were really limited in terms of the draft capital that they had to work with heading in, you'd think that they might have opted to try and trade down and still get their guy, but they didn't want to take the chance, and they took the swing and they got the guy that they ultimately wanted at that spot. I think he represents a bit of a balanced pick in terms of the upside that he presents, but also the kind of projectability and the safer floor that comes along with a player who has a strong two-way game, can play, a heavy style and compete physically like that. But he's still got the upside to contribute on the offensive end as well if he reaches his ultimate ceiling. And I just think it's a nice kind of change of pace to sort of see Dubas and his front office staff have their draft strategy kind of evolve over time to be sort of taking into account more projectability than we've seen with some of their picks in recent years. Again, I said this the other day, it still is sort of a limited sample size in terms of just judging Dubas's drafts because it's only been a few years. So it's kind of hard to peg down a strategy that he's stuck to, but I think we saw some kind of going back to Matthew Nyes in the second round last year. I think this pick is a little bit in a similar vein as a guy who offers that safe floor, but still has some upside.
I was talking about this on yesterday's podcast when we were just kind of going through these players quickly. And when I listened to Fraser Minten talk, he said he felt he was playing his best hockey in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And then I thought this very similar. You look at Nick Moldenhauer, who we'll chat about in a second. You look at him and how he, didn't play really the first half of the season, but had a really strong second half of the season. When you talk about a philosophy with him, you talk about Matthew Nyes, similarly, didn't have a great start to the year, but then ended hot and had a great playoff. I feel like that is something that, Kyle Dubas really highly values, is having, seen progression from start of the year to end of the year. And that may be when he saw the progression out of Fraser Minten, or the scouts did, they looked at that and said, we like the steps he took throughout
trajectory.
That you look at the next 3 years, if he can continue taking those steps, he could be a nice player for them. And I almost feel like that's a philosophy that this group has started to kind of look at.
Yeah, and Minten, to that point, is also one of the youngest players that was available in this draft class. So you're talking about 17 and 18-year-old kids. 10 to 12 months can make a big difference in terms of their developmental path and just how much they've been able to develop in that amount of time. So I think you're right. Kind of going back to that projectability, it's definitely something that they've seemed to have taken into account a little more. And that trajectory that you're talking about, just that steady upward trend throughout the course of the season, I think is something that you can really kind of bank on and hope that continues moving forward.
What have you seen, Nick, from the Leafs in terms of Kyle Dubas's projection, like how he's changed his kind of draft philosophy over the years? It feels like it hasn't really been the same since he first started when he took over the draft in like 2017.
Yeah, well, as I said, I think that they've often taken like high upside swings, especially in the middle to late rounds, which, it's a strategy that makes sense. It's you can fill in the margins of your roster usually with, low level trades or cheap free agent contracts in terms of finding depth players and stuff to fill out your lineup. But you're really only going to find that high end upside if you're swinging on it in those rounds. But I think, again, going back to last year's pick with Matthew Nyes, sort of see an evolution in the philosophy of kind of going after someone who's got more of a projectable frame, has those physical attributes, and again, still has the upside. So I said this the other day as well. It's people often get stuck on, a high upside pick versus a safe pick. And a lot of people automatically divert their attention back to Frederick Gauthier or something like that. But not all safe picks are created equal. And just because someone is considered to have a safer floor or more projectable skill set doesn't necessarily mean that they're completely without upside either. So I think we saw that with Matthew Nyes last year over the course of his season at Minnesota. And I suspect that we're probably going to see a similar kind of trajectory with Fraser Minten going back to Kamloops next year, or at least that's what the Leafs are going to be hoping.
Is there a player who's kind of your favorite player that the Leafs took in this draft?
I was big on Moldenhauer for a lot of the year. I think a lot of Leafs Twitter and Leafs fans in general who have been following the draft class kind of zeroed in on him over the course of the year. There's the obvious connections with Ryan Hardy and the Chicago Steel and all that. But it's almost like that market inefficiency that Mikey was getting to with a player who might have not been turning heads in the first half of the season for whatever reason. In his case, it was injuries and illness. But someone who really came on strong down the second half, and he was a big time player for the Chicago Steel in the second half of the season, just oozes skill and tenacity. And I think if he's able to kind of develop physically in the next couple of years, he's a player that you could be really looking at as someone who was a bit of a steal in that spot, I think. And especially after they traded down and took the chance that he was still going to be there at 95.
Yeah. And, currently 5'10", 170 pounds. So he's got, some ways to go, some weight to add there. But yeah, he's a player who I saw was ranked, when you look at all of the draft boards, as high as 40th on, I think Scott Wheeler had him as 40th. And to get that player at pick number 95, you're laughing. I think you're happy about that. And hopefully he's a local boy, right? Mississauga native. Hopefully, he can turn into a nice little prospect for the Maple Leafs over the next few seasons. All right. The one of the other players that gets a lot of discourse, I guess, to this draft is the big Swedish goalie, right? Dennis Hildeby, which is the least sounding Swedish name I've ever heard in my life. But 6'6", like 230-pound goaltender, played mainly in the junior league, but a couple of games in the men's league in the SHL, performed great. Was a third-year, redraft type of player. He's going to be 21 in August. What can you tell us about Dennis Hildeby? And is there potential that he could turn out to actually be an NHL goaltender, something that the Maple Leafs have not drafted in like 30 years?
Yeah. I'll be honest. Hildeby was, as a player who's already gone through the draft a couple of times, was not someone I had really paid a whole lot of attention to over the course of the season. But you look at the numbers and the physical attributes, and obviously they're intriguing. I think the fact that he has, already kind of gone down his developmental path a little farther than some of the other goaltenders that were available in this draft is something that might have actually been an enticing factor for Kyle Dubas and the Leafs, just because with all players in the draft, you're talking about projecting out kids who are 17 or 18 years old. It's really difficult to do that. you add on top of that the volatility of the goaltending position and just how unpredictable that is from year to year. I think landing a guy who is a little bit further along that developmental path, who has already had some degree of success at the top level where he's from in Sweden, I think that's something that could have been an enticing factor for the Leafs, just because it might be a little bit easier to project him into a pro role within the next couple of seasons. He's got another couple of years left on his deal in Sweden, but by then he'll be 22 going on 23 years old, and you might be able to start giving him that bit of runway to start fighting for those minutes, at least at the AHL level, and go from there. In terms of his potential as an NHL starter, I mean, goalies are voodoo, right? So I think if you're starting out with a guy who's got the physical tools that he has as such a large goaltender, and he's got some athleticism too. I've been trying to catch up on a little bit of the tape on Hildeby. As I said, he wasn't a guy I really zeroed in on a whole lot over the course of the season, but I think you can kind of see he's composed in his net for the most part. I think he can get caught overcommitting from time to time, but in terms of his movements and stuff like that, I think there's composure in his body control. And for such a large player, I think that's a really attractive attribute. It's just going to be about how he develops in the next couple of years over in Sweden.
Yeah, I mean, size and athleticism are the two, when you look at like traits in a goaltender, I feel like those are two very important things. I mean, we were talking about Vasilevsky, and the reason why he's so good is because A, he's so big in the net, and he's mobile and athletic to make those side-to-side saves. So who knows? You know, obviously he was taken 122nd overall, 4th-round pick. How many 4th-rounders make it to the NHL? Not a large percentage of them, but you know, clearly the Leafs felt there is a potential here because they trade a future 4th to go and get him. So we'll see.
I will say, speaking to a couple of friends of mine who scout a lot of the European leagues, there was one particular outlet who had him as the top-ranked European goaltender heading into the draft. So
over the Finnish game?
Sorry?
Like even over that, there was the Finnish.
Yeah, even over Leinonen, yeah, they had him as their top-ranked European goaltender. So while it wasn't someone who was on the radar for a lot of people heading into the draft, there are some who are believers in his potential.
Right on. That's really intriguing. I suppose
why we have Nick on the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. In conversation with Nick Richard from Dobber Prospects and the Leafs Nation Network, I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morisuti. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast. I guess we should chat a little bit about the two other draft picks that the Maple Leafs were able to make. They dipped into the Russian market, which do you think the Russian market took a hit in this draft based on what's going on overseas? They end up taking Nikita Grabankin with the 135th overall pick. But overall, like, does it seem like a lot of these Russians kind of fell? And if that's the case, could this be a situation where you get them at 135, probably should have went a little bit higher, could turn into something?
Yeah, I think we see that to some degree with the Russians every year. And obviously, for obvious reasons, I think we all expected it to be a little more pronounced this season. Yeah. I will say I didn't think that a lot of guys slid as far as I might have expected them to. Outside of Danila Yurov in the first round, I thought if anyone was going to take a swing on a Russian player, he would be the guy that they would bank on early on in the draft. I think Minnesota did really well to get him where they did. As far as Grabankin, he's another guy who's a re-entry, so he passed through the draft last year as well. He had an outstanding season at the junior level. He actually played with Yurov. Big-time numbers, big-time playmaking ability. He's got good size. Questions about the skating a little bit, but I think that's something that he can work on as he continues to mature physically. He's got tons of skill. This guy is like a super slick puck handler, really good vision, makes plays off the wall. It kind of strings plays together in terms of like deking around a defender and being able to quickly chain that into a pass or another move towards the net. I think that's the kind of player that we're talking about with Dubas's philosophy in the past, where you're going for those high upside swings in those mid to late rounds. And I think at that point in the draft, it was a worthwhile pick.
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, and when you think about even going into next year, like I'm curious to know how we knew this year was going to be a tough one for Russians, but I'm wondering about next year because it just seems like the situation in Russia isn't getting any better. And also, how does that impact scouting? Like organizations sending scouts to go and look at the KHL and in the other leagues.
Yeah, I think that's definitely going to have an impact on sending guys overseas to go actually get live viewings and stuff. Thankfully, because of technology, we're or at least for now, I don't know what kind of content we're going to be getting out of Russia over the next several months to however long. But at least for now, we're able to get a lot of video on these kids and be able to keep up with them that way. It's really impossible to say kind of how it's going to impact classes moving forward. I think, given the situation right now, as I said, I kind of expected it to impact the Russian kids a little more than I thought it did this time around. So it could be a similar situation moving forward. But obviously, we've got real world events at play here that, far supersede any kind of hockey related implications. So I think as the real world situation evolves in that sense, it'll kind of be the same way for the kids playing hockey over there.
Last but not least, taken with the 218th pick in the draft, Brandon Lazowski, a little undersized player from the WHL, winger from the Saskatoon Blades. 33 goals for this kid, which I read was only finished behind Jagger Furcus and Matthew Savoy for most goals scored by WHL draft eligible player. So what can you tell us about Lazowski and I guess what he would need to do to be, I guess, work his way into the NHL at some point as a 7th round, one of those guys who really makes it far. I'm not going to call this guy the next Andre Palat or anything like that, but it happens from time to time. What do we need to see out of Lazowski?
Well, for starters, it would be great if he could magically grow a couple of inches, because I don't think he would have been around in the 7th round if he wasn't 5'8", 5'9", whatever he's listed at now. Big time goal scorer. He's got an unreal shot, or an arsenal of shots, really. He can kind of deceive goalies in a number of ways. The way the puck comes off his blade, he'll change the release angle. He can shoot in motion off of either foot. At the junior level, he was, a big time goal scorer. It's going to be a matter of, continuing that physical maturity. It's not as if it's impossible for a goal scoring forward to make it at the pro level at his height. We see it. That just means the odds are a little more stacked against him. But he's not the greatest skater for a guy his size. I think he's got good agility and edge work. Maybe not super explosive at full speed, like a good quick first step and things like that to kind of just separate from guys in tight. But in terms of like breakaway speed, I think you'd like to see more there for a guy his size. Concerns about his game away from the puck, that's something that is going to be a real focus for him moving forward. But in terms of like overall offensive upside, this is a guy I expected to go much earlier, and I wasn't the only one. I think over at the Leafs Nation, we had done a consolidated rankings, and he was well inside the top 100. So to be able to land a player like that in the 7th round, it's again, that's the kind of swing you want to be taking late in the draft. A player that maybe a market inefficiency, who other teams were scared off of his height and maybe the imperfect skating, and the Leafs feel like that's something that they can work with. So I think in that range, I was thrilled with that pick, because frankly, with the speed of the draft on the second day, I thought he had already been selected, right? Like that was breakneck pace. I know we often complain about day 2 of the draft and how long it takes, but if they could find a little more middle ground next year, that would be great for those of us covering the whole event and stuff. So again, I was surprised to see him available at that range, and I was happy that the Leafs were the team to take the swing on him.
I legitimately wonder how much the phone situation contributed to that, where it's like there was rumors of legitimately GMs just like not getting phone calls on these picks. And so they just got, okay, we'll take the guys at the top of our board, because there wasn't a whole lot of trading up and down like you typically see in the middle rounds. It just kind of went status quo as the picks rolled in, and I can't help but feel like that factored in a little bit.
Yeah, now the draft hadn't been in person like the last couple of years, no phone predictions and not in person to discuss any kind of dealings.
Imagine. But you mentioned it. He's a really, really undersized but incredibly skilled goal scorer. But there's like those are his tools, right? Those are the kind of the lone tools he has. And when it comes to drafting late in the process, 5th, 6th, 7th round, that's kind of what you're doing. You're finding people who have elite skill sets in one department, and then you think to yourself, can our can our development system kind of help with those other issues? Can they help him get faster? Can they help him bulk up a little bit? Can they teach him how to be more responsible defensively? And, a guy who probably is never going to get in a position where he can be physically imposing, can we help with his IQ or let him know where to go on the ice to make sure he's in a more favorable position based on positioning, I suppose, for lack of a better term. So you believe that Lazowski is kind of one of those darts you throw at the board where we like this goal scoring, and if we could work on this could be a home run pick at some point, and a guy who can make it to the NHL from a 7th rounder to being an NHLer.
Yeah, you said it. There's no perfect players, especially at that point in the draft, right? So you're kind of honing in on one or maybe two skills in a player that stand out as being potentially NHL quality. So that's why I kind of stand behind Dubas's strategy, and not that he's the only one, but the strategy of kind of taking those more high upside swings later in the draft, because if you're banking on one skill or two skills that might be projectable, they should be, potentially high-end valuable attributes rather than looking for someone who might grow into a 4th line grinder or something like that in the 7th round, because those are guys you can find in free agency or get on the cheap in trades, things like that. Or in the case of one of your higher picks, a guy like Fraser Minten, who does have that upside, but also has that base of skills that will allow him to carve out a role as a bottom 6 NHLer if he doesn't reach his ultimate offensive ceiling. So I think when you're getting into those later rounds, you can afford to take those swings and be a little riskier. Whereas, especially in the Leafs situation with the lack of picks in the last couple of years and the unfortunate situation with Rodion Amirov, they couldn't really afford to be as risky early on in the draft. I think you've got to be kind of shooting to get someone who you project into your roster in the next couple of years in those spots. And that's why I could kind of get behind the Minten pick there. And the same reason that I really like the Lazowski pick in the 7th round.
I still really, really wish they went Braden Schneider. I wanted Schneider so badly. And there he is playing in a Western Conference final for the New York Rangers. But it is what it is. Before we let you go, Nick, there's a couple other bits of, I guess, news that maybe I'd like to get your thoughts on.
We were getting Matt Murray yet?
The Matt Murray trade has not officially.
I'm refreshing Twitter. I'm keeping it.
Yeah, I keep looking. It has not come through quite yet, so maybe I'm just stalling. But we were talking about the qualifying offer situation just before we had you on. And interestingly, we found out that Christian Rubens wasn't qualified. Surprised both of us. Were you surprised by that one?
Yeah, Rubens was the one guy that I was definitely surprised that they went unqualified. He's a guy I was kind of surprised to see as an NHL option last year, even if it was only for a short time, but kind of speaks to the development that the staff has had with him over the last couple of years. A guy who worked his way up from an AHL deal playing in the East Coast League, sorry. But again, they've got a lot of young defensemen that they're going to be trying to inject into the system the next couple of years, guys they've drafted in the last couple of years. Philip Kral is going to take on a larger role. You've got Mikko Kokkonen coming over next season. William Villeneuve's about to turn pro. Topi Niemela will be coming.
Niagara Falls native.
Yes, that's
out.
So I can kind of see why with a player who is maybe closer to what he's ultimately going to be or has kind of topped out or plateaued, I can see why they would decide to move on from him. But yeah, it was one that surprised me.
And then around the league, there were a couple of big time players who were left unqualified. We had heard rumblings that Dylan Strome was going to be left unqualified, so that wasn't necessarily a shocker. Kubalik, a little bit more of a shock, but the big one that came through was Ilya Samsonov, the goaltender for the Washington Capitals. I guess I'll throw two questions into one here, Nick, and it could probably answer both sides, but would you be comfortable with a Matt Murray Samsonov tandem going into next season if you're the Maple Leafs?
I don't know if I'll ever be comfortable with anything as a Leafs fan, to be honest, the way things have gone in my lifetime as a Leafs fan. Yeah, kind of going back to just the unpredictability of the goaltending position and just how volatile it is year to year. There's 5 or 6, maybe 7 guys in the league who you can project each year to be, true, reliable, trustworthy number one goaltenders. And I don't think Matt Murray or Ilya Samsonov are those guys. But in terms of, if you're going to take a swing on what you have in your crease, Matt Murray has winning pedigree, at least. I know things haven't gone well for him the last couple of years, but if you kind of look at his career as a whole, I can see why you might talk yourself into taking him on as a reclamation project. And then you've got Samsonov, who was a first-round pick not that long ago. It hasn't quite worked out or developed in Washington the way that they would have hoped. But he's another guy who has some upside or maybe upward mobility in terms of what he's going to ultimately become. He's still young. Comfort might be pushing it, but I don't think that there's a whole lot in terms of options out there right now for the Leafs. So it's going to be what it's going to be. And I think you could do worse than a tandem of Murray and Samsonov. At least in that sense, you'd be giving yourself two options rather than kind of shoehorning yourself into one guy. And if it doesn't work out with him, then you're really in trouble.
Yeah, I think it's pretty well said. We'll see what happens. As of now, which is 10 after 7 on Monday, July 11th, the trade has not come through. But we're anticipating that by the time this episode hits the airwaves and hits the people, Matt Murray will probably be a Maple Leaf. And then it's just, we'll see if Samsonov is the next guy to come out. But I'll say this. I think if you were taking a look at all the suitors who need goaltenders, right? I mean, Washington, I guess, is one. Edmonton, Toronto, and I guess Buffalo could probably still use a goaltender. There's really only 3 guys.
Yeah. Someone's going to get left without a chair here.
Exactly. And you just hope it's not the Maple Leafs. And I think that's why they're like, well, at least let's get Matt Murray, because then that's at least one dude.
At least one guy who's played some kind of NHL minutes in an extended capacity. Right now the Leafs goaltenders are Eric Källgren and Joseph Wall. So that doesn't inspire a ton of confidence either. I guess when you put it that way, Matt Murray and Ilya Samsonov doesn't sound so bad.
Yeah, and then you're hoping, I don't know, maybe a Grice potentially to pair him up. He's had success in a tandem. It's not looking great if they don't get one of Kemper, Campbell, or Samsonov to go along with Matt Murray. Got to get one of those dudes if you're the Maple Leafs. Got to get one of those 3, I would think.
The Leafs did have the best season in franchise history last year, and they had very subpar goaltending on the whole for the season. I know Jack Campbell was stellar early on, but if you look at the numbers over the course of the season, they rank near the bottom of the league in terms of goaltending efficiency and still managed to put up that kind of season. So I think if you can just get kind of passable, half decent net minding, or at least something that's got some semblance of consistency over the course of the year, I think, the talent on the rest of the roster could help to make up for that. But yeah, it's not a comfortable position to be in.
It's my all-time favorite. No, it's my second favorite stat of the season when it comes to the Maple Leafs. I'll tell you my all-time in a sec. But my second favorite stat, which you may have tweeted it out, actually. It either came from you or somebody else, part of Leafs Twitter. But the Leafs were something like 34-3-1 when they had 900 or better goaltending this season. That's it. Just took 900 goaltending, and they won like 75 to 80% of their games with 900 goaltending.
Not asking for much.
No, asking for quite literally league average, even slightly below league average means this team can win 34 out of 38 games. And I think you'd be happy, which also means they had over 50% of their games where they didn't get 900 goaltending. And they still had like 115 points or whatever it was this year. It's pretty incredible when you actually do kind of look at it. But I still would feel much better with some better players between the pipes to ensure at least 900 for, let's say, 75 to 80% of the games. That would be lovely.
Yeah. No guarantees, I guess. But I guess it kind of speaks to maybe Dubas's willingness to not shell out big money for the position unless there's a guy who is, that undeniable number one, right? Because
it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's just
free agency.
Yeah.
My favorite statistic is my guy, Michael Bunting. Same amount of points this season at 5-on-5 as Connor McDavid.
Oh, here we go.
The fact he didn't win the Calder, despicable.
Yeah, that's an incredible signing. Hopefully, we're not heading into his swan song as a Leaf this season, but
No, hopefully not.
we've got enough to worry about with this offseason. We're not going to get that far ahead.
Yeah, absolutely not. Nick, really appreciate taking the time to join us today, buddy. Why don't you let the good folks listening and watching this and let them know where they can find your work?
Thanks for having me on, guys. I had a blast chatting with you. Thanks for the opportunity. You can find my writing at dauberprospects.com. We do all our draft coverage over there, and over at theleafsnation.com. Myself and Kyle Cushman usually are the ones teaming up on all the Leafs prospect coverage there. I'll have some other Leafs content flowing through the site over the course of the year as well. And if you want to hear me talk about the Leafs a little more, I'm a co-host of the Lamenting the Leafs podcast as well. You can find us on all the major platforms where you find this great show.
Fantastic. Nick, really appreciate taking the time. For Dave and I, that'll do it for today's show as well. Thanks, everyone, for listening and supporting. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcasts and platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morisuti. Go ahead, give Nick a follow as well at _Nick Richard. That's going to do it for us today. We'll be back with another episode tomorrow. Hopefully, we'll have a chance to break down a certain trade with a certain goaltender, or hopefully not if you're on the other side of the argument. I guess we'll see. We'll chat with you all tomorrow. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.